There are 5 colors in Magic the Gathering, and green is the most likely we are to talk about right now.
Technically true. What if Cardmarket was green instead of blue?
Now, there are a lot of green cards in Magic the Gathering. What are you doing?
I'm counting the green cards.
Oh, Yaman, thankfully for you, we're only going to look at the top 5 because we'd be here for a really
Much better
long
video
time.
idea. Much better.
We're going to look at the 5 most powerful green cards in the game. You let us know what you think. At number 5, I have a spicy one. It's Thorn Elves. No, is it Elvish Mystic? Or is it Llanowar Elves? Who knows? It's a tie.
It's definitely Elvish Mystic.
It's the Elfish tribe. It's all of them.
It's the Elves. It's a 1 mana. All these cards have one thing in common. They're all 1 green. They all tap for 1 green. And they are themselves green.
Green.
That's what they do. And the reason why they're so powerful, you think you look at that, it's a 1/1. How is this the 5th best green card of all time? It's a forest that you get to play on your turn and sometimes attack for 1 with.
It's a Mox Emerald that can hit. It's better.
It costs 1 more, which is infinite amount more.
But you can tell how important mana acceleration is just because how good this card is. And all the mana acceleration cards are always balanced around not just what they cost, because Llanowar Elves gives me 1 additional mana on my second turn. Why do I pay 2 for the same effect on Rampant Growth? Well, it's because you can interact with the creature much easier than you can with the land, where...
Yeah, there's a famous thing called Bolt the Bird. Now, you might have noticed, if you're perceptive, that Llanowar Elves is not a bird. Back me up here.
Yes, it is. Yeah, you're right.
So, in Magic, the first 1 mana dork, the first popular one, was called Birds of Paradise. It was a 0/1, it could tap for any colored. They made it a 0/1 because it got the upside of tapping for any color.
It was also randomly flying, I guess fitting for bird.
And it's a term that's often used for 1 mana creatures that tap for 1 mana. They're usually green. And in Magic, it was told, the thing you would tell new players is if someone plays a 1 mana thing that taps for 1 mana, in this case a bird, you bolt it. In this case, you destroy it with anything you have. At all costs, because it reduces the cost of everything in their hand. So they are pretty easy to get rid of.
And it's important, otherwise the cards would be absolutely broken. You get a Rampant Growth at half the cost.
And one thing I'd like to point out is we just said there's a lot of these creatures. The reason we're using Llanowar Elves here is because there's Ignoble Hierarch, there's Birds of Paradise, but Llanowar Elves is an elf. And elf decks really benefit from having so many 1 mana elves that tap for green, and then also add counters, create more tokens, do so many things, add to your Priest of Titania in the elf deck.
There's a lot of synergy.
There's a lot of Llanowar Elf variants.
When were Llanowar Elves first printed?
Alpha. 1990.
Well, get those old cards out of here, because the next card we're discussing is something that was very recently printed. It's a 2-mana enchantment, it's dominated multiple formats. Banned in one of them already, it's Up the Beanstalk.
Oh.
Isn't it last year?
Yeah, it was released within the past year and it's banned in Modern. Now first let's discuss what the card actually does. It's a 2-mana enchantment that draws you a card when it enters the battlefield. Nice, it gives you devotion, a permanent...
Green card draw.
Yeah, it's okay.
White would be happy.
However, it also draws more cards whenever you cast any spell with a converted mana value of 5 or more. Now that seems like a cool thing to do because I like playing big spells. Who am I? I want to spend 5 mana on cards and then draw 1 additional card off of that. But the joke is that you don't spend 5 mana to cast those spells.
It's not a joke. I always end up in tears.
Yeah, it's serious business because you never go down in resources. Usually, when we talk about the current evoke elementals in Modern, right? You exile another card from your hand just to have this one-time effect. Like for Solitude, you exile another creature. But what do you get if you cast a spell with CMC 5 while Up the Beanstalk is in play?
You get a card!
You get a card! Woo! And suddenly,
a brand new card!
Yes, and it potentially costs 5 or more. Maybe it's a Leyline Binding.
A Leyline Binding.
You draw another card. Maybe it's a Force of Will.
Yeah. So the joke is you never pay the actual mana value of those cards to cast them, and suddenly your Solitude becomes card filtering because you exile a bad white card and you just draw a random new card, and also you get rid of an opponent's threats for 0 mana. Leyline Binding is already a crazy efficient removal spell that suddenly draws you a card. It's absurd.
So it's banned in Modern. Where else do people play this card?
You can technically play it in Pioneer. However, in Pioneer, you don't have any of the free spells. So it's way less powerful suddenly because most of the time you do actually have to pay mana. But in Legacy, let me introduce you to Legacy's greatest staple besides Brainstorm. It's Force of Will. A free counter spell that, you guessed it, costs 5.
They even played Teferi, Hero of Dominaria in those decks. Oh, and Terminus.
Terminus is a great example too. Yeah, so basically, if you in any format, if you can cheese the condition, it's amazing, and otherwise, it's a fun card. Like,
It's also, worst case, you draw a card. I mean,
yeah,
it's not that it sticks in your hand.
yeah. Usually, these kinds of big payoff cards, they let you go down in resources. A card that's dear to my heart, Sarkhan's Unsealing, is a 4-mana enchantment that does nothing if you don't work with it. However, if it just had draw a card slapped on when it enters the battlefield, suddenly it's a solid card because worst things come to worst, you didn't even lose a card.
Now, number 3, and hear me out. Some people may laugh at me. I understand. I have some gray hairs because number 3 is Tarmogoyf.
That is a funny one.
I also have gray hair. I'm sorry.
Oh, so you understand, you get me. Tarmogoyf is a 2-mana creature that is an X+1.
That's pretty impressive.
Depending on what X means.
Oh, I was assuming X is like 10.
Oh, it never is. But it's often enough because here's the thing about Tarmogoyf. It's powerful, sure. Is it as powerful as in its heyday? Nah, but it's iconic. And X here is iconic because it was the first card to ever have X as not 10, but the amount of card types in every graveyards. Sorcery, that's a card type. Instant, that's a card type. Creature, that's a card type. Artifact, Planeswalker. Actually, Planeswalker's fun here because there's some fun Tarmogoyf facts. Yaman, tell me a fun fact about Tarmogoyf.
Well, people read the words Planeswalker on that card back in 2007 or something, and they didn't know what a Planeswalker was, so people were confused.
Yeah, they hadn't printed them yet.
Future Sight was a set that was, well, a look into the future of Magic, right, partially, and one of that looks into the future was checking out Planeswalkers, but without actually revealing anything about Planeswalkers. There's also a really weird interaction where tribal is for some reason a card type and not a subtype. So if you ever have a tribal instant in your graveyard, Tarmogoyf becomes a 2/3.
Thank you, Yaman. That was great. Tolf, give me another Tarmogoyf fun fact.
Do you know why it's actually XX+1? No, good, let me tell you. You know Logoyf, right?
Yes.
This is old, like 1995 old.
It's also not particularly good.
It's not.
It's like 4 mana and...
But it was very beloved and very iconic. So they thought if we make Goyfs, creature type Goyf, we also have to make it XX+1 because that's how people remember it from back then. So they made it XX+1 and then realized that's kind of annoying because they want it to be a good card, everybody will play it, and if they face off each other, they're gonna bounce. They're not dying.
Yeah, because they don't have enough power to get the other one's toughness.
One attacks the other blocks, nothing happens.
So they realized, friends, this is not a good card. It makes Magic tough, void states hard. We're gonna make it an XX, done. But it got cut from the set.
The entire card.
The entire card. Because they realized they couldn't make Planeswalkers work for Future Sight. So they put him in Lorvin, the next set. But then they also realized that we don't need Tarmogoyf right here because it doesn't make any sense. A bit later, they realized we need a card in the set. Tarmogoyf was a good card. And it even references Planeswalker, which you're gonna put in Lorvin, and everybody will be freaked out. Does anybody remember how big Tarmogoyf was? That's very easy. It's a Glowgoyf, so it's XX+1. And that's why it was XX+1.
And if you played during the time that it was at the height of its power, that happened all the time.
All the time. I attack with my 4/5. I block with my 4/5.
Yeah, and it was always just like the question, does your opponent have at some point the 3-mana Liliana from Eldritch Moon that granted -1 toughness and could thus pick up the Tarmogoyf once it blocked, or like some other burn spell or something?
It was powerful. It had its heyday. It was played in every modern deck. It was played at time and standard. You don't see it quite so often anymore. It pops out from the woodworks every once in a while with its pipe and its back injuries and tries to do its best. But we have it at number 3 because of the legacy it leaves behind.
Yeah.
Now, number 2 is number 2 because iconically it can end games at exactly that turn. And it's only one card that you should have. It's feared in Cube. It's banned in so many formats.
Forest.
Forest is not banned in many formats. It also doesn't end games on turn 2.
It pairs really well with colorless cards that cost more, but less than the amount of your life.
Channel?
It's in
Channel.
the famous combo Fireball Channel, right?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, that's a very famous combo.
So what does Channel do? Channel is a bit unique because it kind of sets a game rule that now lets you pay 1 life for a mana. Now, if you start with 20 and you're on your second turn, your opponent played a tapped land, that's pretty strong to cast an Emrakul for free, because then your opponent doesn't really have anything to do. You have 5 life, but they're dead. The problem is, it's banned in many formats.
You don't really get to play with it. But if your opponent does actually cast a channel, you really want to follow closely to what they do with that channel. And if you want to follow really closely to what do we do on this channel.
Oh! Now you have to subscribe.
Yeah, as Carl said, there was an iconic part of Channel which will always be the first combo ever. What was it?
Channel gets to do this cool thing. On turn 1, all you need is a land, a channel, a fireball, and Black Lotus, maybe. And if you put Black Lotus, which you probably have one lying around, into play, you sacrifice it, make 3 green, you play channel, you pay 19 life and go down to 1, you can fireball your opponent in the face before they even put a land down.
And that's 20 damage on turn 1.
Iconic!
With just 2 hyper-banned cards that are basically banned everywhere.
Yeah, so unfortunately you probably don't get to have the fun experience that is Channel nowadays, except for Cube.
But in the early days of Magic, this was considered. This blew people's minds.
Yeah, but in Cube, Holiday Cube, every time you draft Holiday Cube, you see a channel, you snap up an Emrakul, and there you go.
And the neat thing of how this ever even existed is because in the early games, you have different resources in Magic. You have mana, you have the cards you have in your hand, and people didn't realize that life total was also a resource. In this case, paying that life, oh, maybe I'll pay 3 life and get 3 mana. That's already pretty good, but I can't go further than... They didn't realize that sometimes you just pay 15 life and it ends the game.
Yeah. Doesn't matter what your life total is. If you're at 1 and you win the game, you won
You
the
still
game.
won the game.
Before we get into the final card, we couldn't agree on everything. So we put some honorable mentions. They're in the link in the pinned comment down below. If you love this and you want to find out which was the 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th best green cards.
As I hinted at the beginning of the video, there's more than 5 actually, so...
Green cards?
Yeah.
There's like 9.
There's some really good ones.
Yeah, and the number 6,000 will surprise you.
Yes, so you like 2-card combos. Well, on a 3-card combo with Black Lotus, but that channel can be a 2-card combo. We're gonna show you number 1, which is a 1-card combo.
No, as you might have realized in Magic, 1-card combos are very strong because you only need to draw 1 card 100% of the time when you draw them.
And this card, you might have guessed it, is Oath of Druids.
I did not.
Well, is that a 1-card combo?
Okay, so in Magic, some people will disagree. They say you need cards in your deck, but in Magic you always need more cards in your deck. If not, you go to draw and you lose the game.
But you need your opponent to have a card. So it's 1 card you, 1 card your opponent, card combo.
So you need to have an opponent. This is how Oath of Druids works.
Already out.
Already out.
I'm gold.
Oath of Druids is a 2-mana enchantment. It sits on the board, and at every upkeep it has a trigger. What it does is that player on top, they look, and they count the creatures on the board. They do some math. If their opponent has more creatures than they do, they reveal the top cards of their library until they hit a creature card and put into play. Fair Magic, you just want everyone to have the same amount of creatures.
Everybody gets to do
Just
that.
a balancing act.
Except if your opponent doesn't know you're doing that, you can fill your deck up with Emrakuls and Progenitus. And they have like Thorn Elves, the 5th best green
To
card.
be fair, then they have a creature and I have a creature.
It's fair! It's anybody's game! The way you usually play this is you put it into play, and then you just wait for your opponent to play a creature. They'll either see it and never play a creature, and then lose to decking, or they'll try to beat you with their creatures, and then you'll just slam huge beaters into play. But if you're playing against a control deck that doesn't plan on winning with creatures, you have some other ways around. You can play Forbidden Orchard, which is a land that you tap it,
Probably the most famous one though.
and you put a creature on your opponent's side. The cool thing about Forbidden Orchards is this is a huge downside. It's gonna tap for any color of mana, but we're gonna give your opponent a 1/1. But when you're playing Oath of Druids, you love it when your opponent has a 1/1.
It also makes you able to cast the Oath of Druid before they cast a creature. Because usually you just sit in your hand and wait, it's like, are you casting a creature? Because I don't want to play it before, you don't play any creatures. But then you give it to them, and it's like, oh, why are you slapping yourself?
Exactly.
The fun part about this is, obviously nowadays, we talk about Emrakuls, Grizzlebrands, all the shenanigans, right? I remember back then, when the deck was the most powerful and it was still allowed to be played, they put in Battlefield Scrounger, which is kind of a mean of milling yourself. It has a threshold, like an ability. You can take 3 cards from your graveyard and shuffle them into your library. Now you only played 2, I think, because once you have them, you don't have a library, and then you draw whatever you want. It's basically just a measure of drawing your best cards, which obviously are very good because, you know, Swords to Plowshares, counter spells.
Because Oath of Druids just put a bunch of cards into your graveyard.
Right. This is basically a control decks element. But before, it's glorious. The creature they were looking for, they played once and they stopped. They didn't want any other creature, was Morphling. They just played Oath of Druids, to get a 5 mana reduction and a free Morphling, and then they said, that's good enough.
Morphling is, at the time, was probably the most powerful creature.
Morphling is like the Tarmogoyf of blue.
Yes, it's no longer good, but there was a time!
You know that there's actually a green Morphling. There's a Thorn.
Yeah, there is, but on a spiritual level.
Yeah, but then imagine, this is old school Magic, right? You play Oath of Druids and you said like, oh, I'm getting my 5 mana 3/3. Don't you wait for it.
Well, good luck with your Morphling. I'm gonna have an Emrakul.
Yeah.
But I can untap it.
You can, I can't untap
It gains flying.
And the coolest thing about this combo is when new players come and they want to play a cool deck, this is one of my favorite things to recommend. This card is like 5 to 8 euro, and Progenitus is 2 euro. So you can just tell a new player, listen, you just, for 10 bucks, for the price of like a really large sandwich, you can get a 10/10 indestructible protection from everything onto the battlefield.
I would recommend 4 copies of Oath of Druids though.
Yeah, that's like 8 sandwiches.
So more like, yeah, or 1 really big sandwich.
So yes, for the price of 1 huge sandwich, you can have 4 Oath of Druids, 1 Progenitus, and a lot of former friends.
We'd stay your friends even through the Progenitus, I think.
Not if you eat the sandwich alone.
Oh, we can. That's why I bought an extra big sandwich.
The
We can all
Progenitus is
share.
fine.
I can handle Progenitus, I cannot handle you eating a sandwich.
No, I can't eat all of this sandwich alone. It's a 40 euro sandwich.
Imagine a 40 euro sandwich.
It's 25, no?
It's more like 25 euro sandwich. Yeah.
What would you
5
put
to
on
8.
that? Truffles?
Ah, just a very fancy restaurant.
Like a bunch of
You would put a
Progenitus.
fancy restaurant on this?
Yes, I would.